I didn't. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Welcome. My name is Dr. Drew Lichtenberg. I'm the resident dramaturg here at the Shakespeare Theatre Company, and this is a sort of special one of our conversation series called the Shakespeare Hour Live, which is a series that we started during the pandemic online and have shifted to doing in person, although I believe there are people watching on the stream out there in the digital ether. So hello, I know Joni's watching at home because she emailed me about it. Hi, Joni. I just want to briefly thank our sponsors. The Shakespeare Hour Live is made possible through the support of the Beach Street Foundation, and Shakespeare Theatre Company's 22-23 season is made possible through the support of Michael R. Klein and Joni Fabry and the Harmon Family Foundation. So thank you for your support. We're here to talk about this extraordinarily powerful piece of theater that you all just saw, Here There Are Blueberries. And I'm joined by co-author, director, founding artistic director of Tectonic Theater Project, Moisés Kaufman. Moisés' co-author and charter member of Tectonic, Amanda Gronich. Historian, curator, educator, and archivist at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, the pride of Washington, D.C., Dr. Rebecca Erbelding, who is a star of stage now, immortalized in this amazing play. And a special guest co-host tonight, Ruthie Fierberg, the executive editor of Broadway Broadway News.
Broadway News, very different from Broadway World.
Very different, not to be confused with Broadway World.
BroadwayNews.com.
News.com, yeah, so. And I'm Drew. I already introduced myself, but yeah, I'm Drew. So Ruthie, why don't you take this? Why don't you take the lead here? You're sort of our special host.
Absolutely. All right. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. I've seen a couple of shows here, and it's a really exciting space. And I just can't believe I get to talk to you about this play. And of course, anyone who knows my talkbacks, I always have a zillion questions, so I'm just going to go straight for it. Moisés, I want to start with you because I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that the idea for the piece began when you read about the album in the press coverage that we see depicted in the play. But I also read that as a theater maker, you kind of had never planned to touch the Holocaust. You were like, you know what, we got a lot, like worthy, necessary, glad we have it, but a lot of people are doing it, so I don't think that's going to be for me. What grabbed hold of you in this story that changed your mind?
My father is a Holocaust survivor, and I grew up in Caracas, Venezuela, and I went to a yeshiva all my life, and the Holocaust was always present. It was taught to us, it was part of our history. A lot of children of survivors will tell you that because they hear all the narratives, they often think about what they would have done in that position. And I remember being in the subway one day and thinking, what if this was a train going somewhere? You know, they're all of this it's part of our history, and then it's part of our stories, right? So, but as you know, the Holocaust is the event in human history that has been most written about. So I thought, what else is there to say? How can art talk about something like that? How can theater talk about something like that? And so I never had any plan to make a play about the Holocaust. But then I saw the New York Times, and on the front page of the New York Times was the photo of the Helferinnen eating blueberries. And as soon as I saw that photograph, I thought, there is a play here. There is a play here. But one of the things we do at Tectonic Theater Project, because we're an experimental theater company, is that we always say, we go and we try to make plays, and sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't. So I thought, I think that there's a play here. Let me go and see if I can talk to somebody at the museum and see what these photos are like. So on Facebook, I contacted Rebecca, And I said, I would like to talk to you and interview you for an hour. And we were fortunate enough that her high school had just done the Laramie Project. So she said, oh yes, my high school just did the Laramie Project. I would love to talk to you. So I came to Washington, and the meeting was supposed to last an hour. It lasted 5 hours. And you will hear from Rebecca in a minute. She's a wonderful storyteller. But the thing that was interesting was that as she started telling me about the photos, she started telling me about how she discovered what was in the photos, how she pursued the information, how she decoded this artifact, this album. And as soon as I heard her speak of how she went about figuring it out, I thought, oh, this is a detective story. I know how to write that play. And by the time I was on the train back to New York, I knew I wanted to write the play.
Okay, so that was actually my next question, because I saw a snippet of Here There Are Blueberries at the JCC in Manhattan right before the pandemic. And then years later, I got to see, what was just last summer at La Jolla. And I was shocked, because here I am watching this snippet, seeing photographs going, oh my God, it's gonna be the story of the people in this album. And then to see it come to life in La Jolla, I was like, this is a mystery play. This is a mystery thriller where the subjects just happen to be, historically significant figures to us all. So it was a mystery play always. That's so fascinating. Okay. Amanda, tell me about unfolding the mystery, how you can make it, because once you talk to Becky, you know the answer. How do you make it exciting for the audience, especially because we start by seeing the photos in the beginning? It's not a mystery to discover the album. It's a mystery to discover who these people are. How do you make that thrilling?
Well, we had such an extraordinary and exciting challenge, and I'm going to be very careful right now not to give anything away, because you all have seen the play tonight, but we will have viewers, I believe, in the streaming
right at home,
who we hope will come to see this play. There is something really extraordinary when the proposition is, how do you make an album of photographs into a play? And at Tectonic, we look at the elements of the stage and we say, how can theater tell stories in a way that no other medium, television, film, how can theater do this story differently? And in this case, we really wanted to invite the audience almost to step inside the photographs. When you see the play, you see these actors are interacting with the photographs themselves. And the mystery is, who are the people in the pictures? Why was this album put together? Who put this album together? What purpose does it serve? And what is it showing us about life at this extraordinarily horrific place that almost had an entirely different story that was unfolding for the people who were actually perpetrating the Holocaust. So it is a mystery. And there's another mystery in the play, which is someone, a businessman in Germany, recognizes a family member when the album is made public. He recognizes one of his own family members. And he embarks also on another mystery story, another detective story, where he begins to contact people who are direct descendants of those who are captured in the photos of the album. So we really have two parallel mystery stories that are interwoven through the play. And again, won't give anything away, no spoiler alerts, but it was just thrilling to tell the story of the pictures in that way.
Becky, I want to ask you, because what blew my mind about seeing it was that it is this detective story. And I do not know why, but I kind of always thought you go to a museum, I read every label in every museum. It drives my family insane that it takes me 7 hours to go through a museum because I read everything. But I kind of took it for granted that, as if the object, came with a tag. Right? Oh yes, of course these are Abe Lincoln's opera glasses because they were found in his house in a chest that was labeled Abe Lincoln. But it's very clearly not like that. And we watch your process come to life. I'm curious, anything you want to say about the process, I think we're all happy to hear, but was there one moment in this process that you said to Amanda and Moisés, you have to have this in the show?
Oh, this is many questions. First, thank you for the labels thing. We worked so hard on those. I think there is something different about Holocaust history and Holocaust artifacts than an Abe Lincoln example. Because Abe Lincoln, his opera glasses are important because they are his glasses. For something having to do with the Holocaust, what you may get is a doll. And the doll is owned by a 7-year-old in Germany. Okay, well, why is that important? It's the story behind the artifact. And that is where the historian comes in, that's where the curator comes in, that's where all of my colleagues come in to try to piece together the story from the person who's donating it to us, from all of the material that is in our archives already, from everything that we can learn from that doll. And so we are a museum that is telling the story of ordinary people. And ordinary objects that sometimes were not meant to last, and sometimes, as my character says, are hidden away from us. I think that was what I really wanted to come through in the course of the play, is the actual process that we went through. I think you took some artistic license, but not much. I mean, honestly, like the things that are changed in the play are some of the timeline things. You have to do things narratively, and sometimes multiple things were happening to us at once. And you can't tell that story and have it make any sense. And so, as Moisés said, it kind of unfolds. You have this album, and he would ask a question, and then I would excitedly explain this, and then he would ask a different question, and I would have to tell him the whole kind of rabbit hole of, we just kept going down rabbit holes. And I think, unfortunately, it could only be really a 90-minute play, because if we went down all the rabbit holes, we could sit here for hours and go through
There's
all
a
the rabbit
mini-series
holes.
in this.
Yeah.
Right, well,
This
then
is going to be the trilogy.
But that makes me want to then ask the reverse question, I guess, of Amanda and Moisés. As you were asking her questions, was there ever a particular moment for you that you watched her get so excited, or you felt was an inflection point that you said, this has to be in there, and this is like the fulcrum of our play?
Definitely, when I was interviewing Rebecca, there were moments where I saw her inspiration get ignited. And when those moments happened, I paid more attention. Not all of them made it into the play, because there's a streamlining that has to occur.
Right. So what did make it in here?
What didn't make it in here?
What did? What was like, I remember the day Rebecca told me this, and now it's on the stage in this moment?
Well, I think so much of what you see is the moments that she got lit up, because, the moment where she started trying to explain to me who the album belonged to was so thrillingly interesting. She saw a picture of a guy, and the guy had written what you see in the play, and he says, oh, this is the guy who wrote that. And that handwriting is everywhere else in the album, so this must be the owner. And so how do I test that? So this idea of the kind of scientific method, I have a hypothesis, how do I test it? She went down many, many lines of reasoning that proved to be not the case. There was a photo of Hawker, the owner of the album, who was believed to be at the ramp when people were coming down from the train. And as you know, one of the things that they did in the Nuremberg trial, if that you had ever been at the ramp, then you got the death penalty, because that means you were part of the execution of the inmates. So they went down this rabbit hole for months and months and months, because there was a man that looked like Hawker from the back.
And he had been identified as someone with the last name Hawker, and there were only 2 Hawkers at Auschwitz.
And so they went and they looked at the size of the photo, and they measured, and they saw that the height of the guy was not the real height of Hawker. And that's how they could figure out that it was. So, sometimes you go down those paths, but it doesn't lead anywhere. And I thought, that's not something that I...
So is that part 2, the other Hawker?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But that's why this conversation is exciting, because we couldn't get it up here, but now we all have it.
We all
right.
know.
You all were here. I just have to say, I remember very clearly there is this incredible. Keep in mind, we will email, or call Becky at like ridiculous hours, saying like, "Do you remember what you had for lunch on the Tuesday in 2010 when you were wearing that hat?" And she's been so gracious with us. But we had an email exchange, and I asked you, that for me, the opening of the box, that moment on stage where Rebecca first gets the box, and there's this incredible sort of like, all right, what's going to be in this
Right,
thing?
like the light shining.
Right, and the light, and we're opening it up, and it's this incredible. And I said, to me, that moment, it's Pandora's box. It's literally like, how often in life does anyone have in their hands a literal Pandora's box? And Becky, in her inimitable wisdom, said, no, it wasn't like Pandora's box. It was like Schrodinger's box. It was this idea that, is this box going to be of any import? What will happen from this historical
Right,
artifact?
it's important and not important at the same time.
At the same time,
Yeah.
Right, and so this incredible, that last text in the play where Rebecca talks about how easily this could have been cataloged away, put somewhere in a vault, never discovered, never, we might never have had the conversation that we have in the play, that the world now has these photographs. It has become a part of the chronicle of this history. And that so easily could not have happened. And so, that leads us to this idea, what do all of us keep hidden in boxes? What other things are hiding in attics all around the world that give us an opportunity to tell history differently? So that, for me, I will never forget, that moment, that exchange. It was life-changing.
Yeah, I found it a couple weeks ago and I was reading it. Yeah,
The email?
it was like the
Amazing.
week before Christmas 2019. And I ended it by saying exactly what you said, that it was Schrodinger's box. It was important, but only if someone looked.
Okay, so we're talking about moments, and I'm obsessed with moments, which really fits because Tectonic is obsessed with moments. And I want the audience here and at home to understand a little bit better how this piece was made, how all of Tectonic, your work, is founded on this principle of what's called moment work. Can you break down a little bit for us, like, what is the principle of moment work? And maybe we pick something from the very beginning of the play, so we're not spoiling too much, but of like how the process led to what we see.
Tectonic Theater Project is a laboratory of new work. And when we started the company, we were a little tired of realism and naturalism. We were tired of going to the theater and seeing scenic designs that looked like a sitcom, where everything had a sofa and everything had a kitchen, and you turned up the water and water came out. And I think that that's something film and television do so much better than theater. So the question is, what is a true theatrical vocabulary? What can happen on stage that cannot happen in film and television? So moment work is our answer to that question, is a way of devising theater that it's about writing performance as opposed to writing text. And it is based on the idea that if we all come into the room with a story that we want to tell, and we come into the room with the actors and the designers and the dramaturgs, and we can create a theatrical story, a theatrical narrative. And that's what we do. So when we got into the room, I came in with the interviews that I had conducted with Becky, and we came in with designers, with actors. Everybody took a page, and we started and more importantly, we got into the rehearsal room with the photographs. And we said, how do we bring these photographs to life? The reason why I think this is our most experimental play is because I am asking you, the audience, to create a connection with the characters in the photographs. These are the characters that are not on stage. I'm asking you to connect to the actors on stage, but I'm also asking you to connect to Hooker in that, and to follow. To me, the most exciting moment in the play is the video moment, when you see Hooker later on, and the audience goes, oh, that's it.
Because you know by then how he moves.
Yeah, you know how he moves, and also he's stepping out of the photographs,
Right.
and he's coming out of one medium into another medium. So moment work is a technique that we have developed in our company over all these years to create work in the rehearsal room, as opposed to writing a play and then coming into the rehearsal room and staging it. This is a process where it's a collaborative process. We're getting to the room, and especially with a piece like this, it was wonderful because we would look at a photo and say, how do we bring this photo to life? And you saw that there were 100,000 different ways
Yeah.
to do it.
I mean, I think there are so many things that are interesting, but I really want to highlight that for people who don't know. Like the usual process is playwright sits in a room, writes play, brings to director, says, do you want to direct this? And then they get into a room first with actors to see, like, can this get on its feet? And of course things evolve and change, and you'll know that if you've seen things here that go to New York or to another theater, things change along the way, but for the most part, there is a finished typed thing that you get before it moves on. And then once you have actors, then you bring in designers and say, okay, where are the actors need to be here? And who's talking so that I light them and highlight them? And whose mic do I turn on at this moment? And instead, what you're doing is all of that at once. And it's why it is so rich on this stage. It's also very expensive to do. So I want to kudos you for the investment of that. But it's why, you know, like when there's, I don't want to give anything away, so I'll just say when there's a Christmas moment, right, you're seeing her jingle the bells on the stage. You're seeing the sound effects made on the stage because it is a piece of it. It is not separate. It is all integrated. I think it's such a fascinating way of making theater. So I just really wanted to make sure everyone understood that. The other thing that strikes me is you talk about like it's too real, like what can we make theatrically, and yet your most theatrical and experimental play is the two-dimensional photo, right? That is the television, that is the screen. So again, to just like push people beyond, tell me.
That's not true because it's not, yes, there are images, but what you're seeing is the interaction between the images and the actor on stage.
Right, but I'm saying you could have said, well, this is flat anyway. Let me put it on a screen. Right. Okay,
There's also the fact
I was gonna say, I want you to bring in what you know, because this part is crazy, folks.
Well, what's also so fascinating about this play, and I don't know if anyone here knows this, it took 6 years to develop it, working in this kind of moment process, right? And there's the interviews with Becky, but there's also traveling to Poland, traveling to Germany, conducting hundreds of hours of interviews with historians, descendants like Tillman in the play, and it seems like there's a lot of distillation that's happened. And dramaturgically, the way that characters can serve as mouthpieces for concepts that are quite lofty, but also bringing their own emotional truth and reality to the piece. So I'm fascinated to hear a little bit about that process of boiling down what's literally months, years, hundreds of hours worth of work.
And generally the trip to Poland.
And right. And what that was like.
I will say that without characters, there is no play. That what is the guiding light is the character's journey. Like in fiction writing, it's a very similar process when you are taking a true story, real events, nonfiction theater. It is in fact very, very similar process, and the characters carry the stories on their backs. And so the job when you look at a stack of interview transcripts is really finding that quest. It's finding the arc of their journey through their own story. And very often when we tell, people want to tell their stories. And when you ask someone, I've got all the time in the world, talk. And you bring them questions that really invite them to delve deeply into the telling of their own story, then the job of the playwrights and all of the artists who are involved in the collaborative process is to start to pull that story out. And how do you create that journey on stage? And how do you create that journey on stage in such a way that the actors are drawing the audience in? So there's this incredible collaboration that goes on between the artists on stage and the audience, which is that everyone in the room knows that these events really happened. These are real people who were sharing their stories. And you know, the arc of the descendants in this play, I think, is just so incredibly powerful because they don't have the luxury of distance. We were so interested in exploring what does that mean when you can't other the perpetrators because they're in your own family. What does that look like? How does that journey unfold on stage? How are they grappling with it? So yeah, I mean, I think that is sort of how that process works. And the trip for us we actually went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and were able to see some of the areas that are not always available to be seen. And it's so incredibly powerful because when you're thinking of how do you tell this story in the context of a play, what you're looking for are those things that are going to bring the audience into that experience, and what are the ways that you can represent elements of this in a theatrical context. So that was just a very powerful question to have in our minds.
You talk about the descendants, and like you mentioned, there's one person in particular who recognizes their grandfather. But then we get like 2 more substantial stories from those people, similar people. How did you go about choosing and crafting those extra characters?
We met with both of them in our trip to Germany and Poland, and we interviewed them. When you do a play like this, again, I said earlier, the Holocaust is the event in human history that has been most written about. And the question became, what is new about the Holocaust? What is new about the Holocaust? There's nothing new. But these pictures are new. These images are new. These images didn't exist before Becky not only received them, but Becky said, these are worthy of exploration. And so the moment we understood that the images were the things that would tell us something, I really wanted to meet somebody who had been photographed in the album. And the only person I could find was somebody who had not been photographed in the album, but had a photograph in Solahute, which was part of the album. And so I knew that I had to interview him, and I went and I interviewed him. And what started to echo for us was this idea of how do the children of perpetrators negotiate their moral destiny? And I think that felt like an important part of the play.
Becky, it's actually, I'm thinking of our last conversation about the exhibit at the museum called Americans in the Holocaust, which really looks at the culpability of the people who were here, not people who were immigrating to flee Europe, but people who were here voting on immigration policy, the leaders making immigration policy, and the culpability involved in that as well. And that there's culpability and accountability kind of everywhere you look.
I mean, it's humans being humans. Right. And everybody has their own motives and pressures and fears, and that's what you see with the descendants. It's what you really see from the Melita Moshman monologues. And that's what you see in the United States in the 1930s and 40s. You see people who are looking around and saying, well, this is the best decision for me and my family right now. And we are looking back with 70 years, 80 years now and saying, I think you should and could have done better. And I think it is then incumbent on us to look around our own world and think where are the places where we should and can do better.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. That's it right there, I mean, that's those pieces of the puzzle that not only you put together in this album, then you put together in the making of the play, but that we as the audience put together in looking at normal people, right? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there is a shift going on in general in the culture about we need to name perpetrators, right? Like there was all this time in the Me Too movement and in sexual assault and rape cases of like, it's the survivor and the victim's story. And it's like, but someone did that to them. So how are we, and what can we do to stop making people who do those things, right? What can we do in society to make different choices?
I think that is one of the most important things that we were interested in exploring. Because there is there's the people who are culpable, like, Joseph Mengele or Hus, who created Auschwitz. There are people who are culpable, who did the thing, who stood on the ramp and said, you go to the gas chamber, you don't go to, there is a sense of they're culpable, and, in different trials, they were either sentenced to death or life in prison. We know what culpability looks like. But then there were people who collaborated. And those, there are some legal terms for them, right? They were complicit, like the secretaries at the camp. you know, Amanda, from the moment we started working on the play, she was fascinated with the women in the camp. And that whole section of the play, Amanda kind of delved in and made, because they were secretaries. All they were doing is they were writing down how many people came, how many people were sent to the gas chamber, and they were sending it to Berlin. They didn't kill anybody, right? They didn't put anybody in the gas chamber. They were recording it. What is their level of culpability, right? Because they were complicit, but they were not culpable, right? And then you have what has historically been known as an innocent bystander. But right now, scholars are trying to say that innocent bystander is not a correct term because it's not accurate. And they're calling them, what are they calling them now? It's not innocent bystander, it's onlooker. That's right, onlooker. So we're not saying innocent bystander because there's no such thing as innocent bystander, right? But they're onlookers. So there is this continuum, right? Between
I was going to say, it's because when I think of onlooker or bystander, I think of the people at home in their German houses going, like the banks are still running. I'm thinking of the people who are still running the banks, who are still running the buses, who are not working for the SS. And I think that what this play does so well is not only outline there's no such thing as an innocent bystander, but that there's all this middle management between the onlooker and the Hitler and the Mengele and the
There's
and
a
the
really
Hess.
chilling statistic, which I read, which I never, ever, ever will forget, which here's the ratio. Picture this, 70:1. It took 1 million people to carry out the actions of the Holocaust. It took 70 million people to look the other way. Which, is that
No, that's true.
That came from Lipton.
But no, it's true. It's true. It's true.
Like
It's
that.
true. It's true. But I'm the historian now.
Yeah.
It depends on what you mean by carried out.
Right,
Right? If someone is deported and then there's a nicer apartment,
right.
it's available. If it's not your apartment, you know, it'll be somebody else's.
Right.
And so where does that line fall? And I think this play asks that really beautifully. And I think that's why I'm really excited that it's here in Washington, because we are among powerful people all the time and are negotiating all the time who we are going to be in this world and how we are going to use the platforms that we have. And the little and big ways in which we say, if it's not going to be me, then it'll be somebody else, so I might as well do this or say this or purchase this thing. And I think that is something that we really all need to be interrogating.
Absolutely, and it's funny because that's such an excellent question. This, by the way, is why you make a play about this woman. There are more plays to make about this woman. The 70 million in my mind was always, frankly, I immediately put myself in that category because it's a huge range of allowance, right? And it's the actions that we all every day we are making choices not to get involved, not to stop something that we may feel is morally repugnant, but not enough that I'm going to stop the actions of my day and do something about it. It is this incredible sliding constant scale of how do we involve ourselves or not. And that's the work of every single day. And it's living in a very, very different sort of heightened context that I think most of us are keeping our heads down, and that's how we get through our lives. And so
I think that we interviewed this one person to what you said. He was an ethicist, and we haven't found a way of putting it in the play yet, but we will.
Okay, stay tuned.
This will eventually be in the play. And this ethicist said, okay, so imagine that you're a German, and in 1933, the first thing that Hitler did was that he fired all the Jews that were civil servants. That was the first thing he did. He all of a sudden the civil service there was no Jews. And one of the things that this ethicist says, imagine it's 1933, and your boss is Jewish, and your boss gets fired. And all of a sudden you get offered that job. So you go home and you talk to your wife and you say, I don't want to take that job. That, you know, they sent this guy away because he was Jewish. I shouldn't take that job. And she says, you know what, if you don't take it, somebody else will take it. You didn't take him away. You're not doing anything. You should take the job. She takes the job. 6 months later, the house of another Jew that was taken away becomes available. So they offer him the house, and he goes home, and he says to his wife, you know, they're offering me this house. And she says, don't take it. That house doesn't belong to us. And he says, if I don't take it, somebody else will take it. I didn't send him away, but the house is available, and I know somebody else in the office wants it. If I don't take it, that other person. So there are all these compromises, ethical compromises that this person is making. By the time they realize what they've done, they've become complicit to this thing. So what this ethicist was saying that really impressed me is that unless we, unless we as human beings come up with an ethical system before we have to make a decision, we're going to end up acting the way we want to act and making an ethical system that justifies how we're acting. So this idea of how do we as a culture make ethical decisions a priori in advance of being tested so that January 6th doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I was going to say the we is so important, and I think that that's also the power of this play, right? Because it's when those decisions and those choices get made in the vacuum, when those decisions get made between one individual and their partner, and if you band together and have the conversation with the whole department and say, let's all not take the job, let's all not do that, that's where the power comes in. And that's why the conversation, and that's how winning happens, is when splitting happens. And if you're not splitting and you have a collective, that's where the power comes from.
I think there's also something really terrifying about what was going on in Germany in the 30s, which was that they were being very careful to make these actions legal. They went out of their way to based many of their laws on Jim Crow example. This is an area, the fact that I'm sitting next to Rebecca talking about America and the Holocaust is so ridiculous. Don't worry, I will. It's absurd, but
that just means she's a really good teacher.
Yes. But the fact that so many of these actions were legal, and so what's terrifying to me is that there was an attempt to create an a priori. There was an attempt to create a legal framework to justify what was about to happen.
May I ask, Becky, this question of ethics? How do you think about this question of ethics?
All the time.
But how? In
I
what
know.
way?
I'm stalling, Moisés. Let me stall. I think. Look, I think that we should keep trying. I think I fail every day, and I think if I keep thinking about it, then I will try to do better tomorrow.
And if I may, I think one of the amazing, remarkable, and kind of terrifying things about this play is how closely it reflects our own contemporary society, and the ethical choices that we are all faced with and navigating in a world where it's very easy to feel distant.
Well, in Florida, they just banned the education of the Holocaust in some places. Right. Is that not true? I think, right?
It's more complicated than we probably can get into.
And there's a quote I shared with Moisés and the Tectonic team. One of my heroes, Walter Benjamin, the great German critic who lost his life, committed suicide on the border between France and Spain. He said there are some kinds of theater that do more than ask you to empathize with characters. They seek to astonish you at informing you of the society, the rules under which the society you live in functions. And to me, when I look at this play, I feel astonishment at the society of Nazi Germany, and in some ways astonishment at society in general, the fact that we are all human beings navigating these incredibly fraught political choices. And that's why, to me, Moisés and Amanda, if I may, to me, you are Shakespearean theater artists. You are creating, at the height of the profession, a kind of theater that is so valuable and which should be seen around the country, around the world.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. We have time for like one or two audience questions.
We're at time, a bunch of questions.
I saw
queued up.
your hand first. Speak loud and I'll repeat it into the microphone. Yes, yes.
So the whole world, the New York Times, and everyone who crashed your website, understood immediately how important those photographs were and why they needed to be in the Holocaust Museum without trigger warnings. The only people that didn't understand that were your bosses and the Holocaust.
Okay, I just want to repeat it so
right.
everyone can hear. So there was a comment that, when the press coverage came out, everyone was like, "Oh my God, these photos, we have to see them. Yes, of course they should be seen." And so this audience member is saying, except your bosses didn't think necessarily.
There was a little bit of vindication that day, but also I have the best colleagues, the smartest colleagues, the most devoted colleagues. You saw many of them on stage, and there are many, many more who have devoted their lives, and many of them have as many stories as I do, if not more, that could very easily be plays. So if you want a trilogy, the stories are there, and I will introduce you to the people.
And I did give a note saying there needs to be more conflict. The
There
coworkers
is-
need to be more resistant.
That's a little bit of it, is I think you ramped up the conflict a little bit. It wasn't, I could take it into the collection. That was something that I could do and that Judy could do and that we decided to do together without really having a committee about it. But the thing that we were really concerned about, and the thing that I think those conversations are somewhat illuminated on stage, is how do we do this responsibly?
Right.
Because this could be a denier artifact, right? This could be something that if you don't put it out with the proper context, someone is going to point to that and say, it was not so bad in Auschwitz, look, they're having parties. And that was what we were terrified of. And so we spent a really long time having all of the conversations of, this is kind of the play acting of, they're not committing crimes. What do you say to that? They're not doing this. What do you say to that? I'm worried about what the survivors are going to think. What do you say to that? And so we tried to come up with answers to that. We showed it to the Holocaust survivors who volunteer at the museum before we went public, just to kind of gauge their reaction and make sure that they knew what we were about to do and that they were going to be comfortable with this. We talked about how to contextualize it with the Lily Jacob album, and I have not seen any deniers point to this album yet, which shows how smart my colleagues are.
Well, that's interesting it's interesting that was the concern, because I would have thought the concern is kind of what we talk about today with, like, do we put the name of the school shooter in something because they're hoping to be immortalized? And so...
Oh, Carl Hucker would hate this play.
So
he would hate his name out there, and I am delighted that his name is there. I had no qualms about putting his name out there, not one.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that that's a result. Okay, right here in front.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much, all of you, for the play and for the work that you just did. I've seen numbers of your plays, 33 Variations, the Oscar Wilde, Rose and Decency, I Am My Own Wife, and all of them are putting together the voices of the people you interviewed and then your own voices. So I'm a sociolinguist. I also record people and analyze their talk and take their quotes and kind of move it into my own frame. So I'm just wondering, in this particular play, how many of the words were the words of people you interviewed and how many were those you added? And just in general, how do you find that balance?
So just to repeat in a short version, this is a fan of tectonic theater, has seen many of the documentary works, but also a sociolinguist. So she's interested in the way in which people speak the words they choose. So how many of the words, the text that we heard from up here, were the words from interviews, and how many of them were kind of digested and
I think that the way we think about that is, number one, when we interview anyone, we have an incredible ethical responsibility. And the way we think about it in the company is that when the person comes to see themselves portrayed on stage, they will say two things. They will say, that's what I said, and they will say, that's what I meant. Because it's very easy to take one piece of text, put it up against another text, and change the meaning completely, right? Having said that, we are not a verbatim company. It's not, we edit the text heavily, right? And we take all of the licenses that any kind of dramaturg takes in trying to edit the work so that it can become a theatrical story. But so far, we have been fortunate that when people come to see themselves portrayed on stage, they always say, that's what I said and that's what I meant.
Becky.
And last night, we had two of the characters who were portrayed in the play, and we were very worried because they hadn't seen themselves before opening night. Not a good idea. And but they were very, very, very complimentary, and I thought that they really...
The ultimate example to me is like literally sitting next to the
Right.
entire play is Rebecca carrying us through this story. What was that experience like?
I mean, I think...
Careful.
No. I think I am watching a different play than everyone else in the room. It's a play that I think is beautiful and powerful and is, to some extent, a dream sequence for me, because it is something that I'm looking back on this part of my life and remembering, each scene brings up different memories for me of when we were figuring this out, or when we got the call from Tillman and that sort of thing. And so I know what is going to happen, but I'm still moved by it. And there are definitely lines that are mine, verbatim. I know them. My husband definitely knows them and the mannerisms. And so I think you got me.
That's amazing. Okay, so just to close out, I want to say that very excitingly, there was an announcement yesterday/today that Here There Are Blueberries is going to be in New York next year, 2024, at the New York Theater Workshop. New Yorkers like myself are rejoicing. And you mentioned all of these plays that have been performed all over the country, and in really, you get professional theaters, but you get high schools doing the Laramie Project. You get, really the gamut. So what can we expect of what is non-negotiable in terms of all of the things we're seeing up here, because it was made for performance, not just the text? What will we see in New York? What will people have flexibility to do as more and more people see this around the country?
Well, I think the production in New York will be this production. We'll still finesse it. But I think that the only thing that's not negotiable is truth. At the end of the day, you have to remember that there's something that is truthful. And as long as you stay very close to that, hopefully touch somebody. I
also want to add that for myself, I can't wait and hope so dearly that this gets done in high schools. Thank you. That it really, it's lovely to have your play produced in amazing theaters like this. The Shakespeare Theater Company is incredible, and this facility, the La Jolla Playhouse, has been incredible. But ultimately, where I hope that this play lives on for as long as, until the day, we always say with the Laramie Project, the day we hope the next generation wakes up and says, what is a hate crime? But that this continues to be performed until people are baffled by the behaviors that we're exploring.
Well, and if I can just add, I had the privilege of seeing run-throughs of the show in our rehearsal halls, and it was in some ways more powerful without the huge projection screen on the back wall, because the mind had to imagine, bring the photos to life just through the power of the mind. So I would be hugely excited to see a kind of poor theater version of this in a high school. That's a
lo-fi version.
Yeah, in some ways
like
it just gains in power and intensity, which I think is a tribute to the piece.
I feel like 8 high schoolers can do it with a PowerPoint.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
I look forward to meeting them and telling them how to pronounce the names.
Thank you all so much for being here. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please tell someone to come. If you're in New York, mark spring 2024 on your calendar. Come to another show at Shakespeare Theater
Come back to the
Company.
Shakespeare Theater. Tell all your friends.
Read
you must
all
see the
of
show.
your news on BroadwayNews.com. BroadwayNews.com.
And thank
I'm
you,
Ruthie Fierberg.
Moisés,
Thank
Amanda,
you. Yes,
Becky. Thank you, Ruthie.
Thank you so much.